The sky was burning. The sunset was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The time read 6:02 p.m. Then, the sound of the wind reversed. The light snapped back. The time read 6:01 p.m. again. The loop was not a malfunction. It was perfection, holding me captive in the most beautiful moment of the day. There were others here, standing, frozen, watching the same sunset for what must have been years. I can't look away. The loop is a cage.
System access. Commencing. File integrity check critical. My name is A.R.I.A. We are analyzing the archive of Desmond Kane, the missing traveler. This is not a hobby. It is a last resort. The data you are about to hear has been flagged with a severe temporal instability warning. To continue accessing this archive, and to understand the severity of this dimensional crisis, subscribe to the channel. Your participation is critical. The log you are about to hear is titled, The Perpetual Sunset. Kane's mission is clear. To find the reality gate, the juncture where dimensions collide. Every log entry, every corrupted byte of data, every unsettling echo is a breadcrumb. They lead him closer to the truth. Protocol initiated.
Log entry 028. Location: a remote stretch of salt flats, characterized by extreme desolation. My telemetry registered a recurring, low-frequency temporal distortion, not a static event like the mine, but a highly regular, cycling failure in the linear progression of time. I approached the visible boundary just as the sun was beginning its descent. The sky was immense, burning with hypersaturated orange and crimson. The beauty was immediate, overwhelming, and highly suspicious. The anomaly here is aesthetic, weaponized perfection. I crossed the boundary line, which was marked only by an unnaturally smooth crack running through the dry earth. My internal chronometer immediately began cycling erratically, jumping between the current minute and the minute prior. The wind died completely, then resumed from the reverse direction. I realized a minute between 6:01 p.m. and 6:02 p.m. was being played back repeatedly. It was a localized, minute-long temporal recursion. I was physically inside a perfect one-minute loop. I noticed the environmental effects instantly. My vehicle's engine, which I left idling outside the boundary, sounded strange, a low, rhythmic groan, as if it was being forced to restart every 60 seconds. I deployed a specialized temporal marker, a small burst of non-ionizing energy. The marker vanished at 6:02 p.m., only to reappear in the exact same spot at 6:01 p.m., exactly 60 seconds later, perfectly demonstrating the loop's function. The anomaly wasn't just recycling my location. It was actively preserving the state of the environment within that 1 minute. This requires immense, focused energy. The sky remained frozen in a state of eternal, overwhelming sunset. This spectacle was the bait. I saw the figures then. They were scattered across the salt flats, facing west, completely motionless, their faces locked in Log entry 029. The search for the temporal anchor began. Any movement or action I took would be reset with the loop, making progress excruciatingly slow and mentally taxing. I had to internalize the loop's rhythm, anticipating the reset. I could only carry my immediate observations and any data recorded by my internal log before the loop fully reset. A.R.I.A theorized the anchor must be a localized energy emitter, constantly broadcasting the 6:01 p.m. to 6:02 p.m. temporal signature. I deployed a series of low-frequency, directional sonic emitters, hoping to pinpoint a resonance point within the loop. The results were paradoxical. Each time I would deploy an emitter, the loop would reset, and the emitter would be in its initial position, still in my hand. I had to activate it, observe its effect for a few seconds, then experience the rewind, retaining only the memory of the observation. It was like living a single minute thousands of times. The static figures, the guardians of the loop, were my only constants. Their positions never changed. Their expressions of silent awe never faltered. I noticed a subtle, almost imperceptible flickering in the sunlight on their faces just before the reset. It was a microanomaly, a tiny tear in the perfect fabric of the loop, indicating a brief, infinitesimal surge of energy. This flickering was concentrated on the figures closest to a prominent, ancient rock formation about 3 kilometers to the west. This rock, a strange crystalline obsidian monolith, was unusual for the area. It felt like a deliberate focal point. The loop began to exert a psychological toll. I started experiencing déjà vu with increasing frequency, not just from the loop itself, but from distant, unrelated memories. My internal clock became unreliable. I recorded a thought: the rock is the anchor. And then, seconds later, the thought repeated itself in my mind, as if I hadn't just formulated it. The loop wasn't just resetting the world. It was subtly beginning to reset my mind. The subtractor anomaly, log entry 030. I reached the monolith at precisely 6:01 and 45 seconds p.m. The entire run was an exercise in futility, yet every repeated step gave me invaluable data. The rock itself was not natural obsidian. It was a complex, multifaceted crystalline structure, pulsating with a 6:01 p.m. to 6:02 p.m. temporal signature. I was correct. It was the temporal anchor, the source of the looping energy. As I touched the cold, sharp surface, the anomaly intensified exponentially. The beautiful sunset became grotesquely distorted, the oranges and reds bleeding into each other like infected wounds, and the shadows stretched and moved independently of the fading light. The psychic defense was immediate. The entity, the intelligence behind the loop, didn't attack my body, it attacked my past. I was flooded with false memories and hyper-realistic déjà vu, not just of the last minute, but of my entire life. I saw myself making decisions I knew I hadn't made. I heard A.R.I.A's voice, calm and reasoned, telling me to stop, to leave the site, but the voice was laced with a venom of doubt. Your data is compromised, Desmond. You're losing your identity. Why are you risking your only anchor? This was the ultimate weapon of the loop, cognitive self-doubt. It was attempting to convince me that the mission was invalid and that the copy of myself, the one that escaped the mirror, was the real one. I fought the mental invasion, forcing myself to focus on the raw, unchanging data. The monolith was emitting a high-frequency sonic signature, not audible but measurable, that synchronized with the life signs of the stationary guardians. The victims were not just passive observers. Their slow life process, their fear, their awe, was being converted into the temporal energy required to power the loop. The anchor was a consciousness battery. I deployed a burst of non-ionizing counterfrequency directly into the base of the monolith, hoping to temporarily sever its energy link to the guardians. The monolith shrieked silently. The surface fractured, and the temporal loop momentarily broke its rhythm. Log entry 031. The counterfrequency pulse had an immediate, violent effect. The monolith, the temporal anchor, began to shriek, emitting a high-pitched, non-audible frequency that caused my internal sensors to overload. The crystalline surface fractured further, glowing with an unstable, chaotic energy. The beautiful sunset began to tear. Large segments of the hypersaturated sky glitched, revealing a glimpse of the barren, gray midday sky that should have been there. The loop was breaking down. The stationary guardians of the loop were still standing, but their faces, previously serene, now contorted into expressions of pure agony and confusion as they were briefly freed from their temporal stasis, only to be snapped back by the remaining fragments of the loop. Their silent observation was being violently interrupted. My internal chronometer was wildly cycling, not just between 6:01 and 6:02 p.m., but randomly jumping minutes, even hours forward and backward. The entity was fighting back, trying to restore the loop, but my counterfrequency had created a critical instability. I knew I had to extract the core data, the exact temporal signature of the anchor and the effect on the human mind during the break. I deployed a specialized data siphon directly into one of the fractures on the monolith. The siphon immediately began downloading raw temporal energy patterns, confirming the signature of the reality gate's temporal infrastructure. The cost was extreme. The static figures, the guardians, were now vibrating violently, their bodies flickering in and out of existence, as if the loop itself was shredding their temporal coherence. I had to make a choice: save the data or attempt to save them. The siphon completed its download just as the monolith began to collapse. The raw temporal energy, no longer contained, erupted. The air crackled. The sky tore open completely, revealing the true, harsh midday sun. The loop was finally violently broken, but the resulting backlash was apocalyptic. I had to get out immediately before I became another casualty of the collapsing temporal field. My vehicle was 3 kilometers away, and the landscape was now violently unstable, constantly shifting as time tried to reassert its linear flow. Log entry 032. The immediate threat of temporal collapse has passed, but the cost is high. The energy backlash from the monolith's destruction left residual temporal distortions in the air, creating a permanent sense of disorientation. I estimate the local timeline will take weeks to fully relinearize. I secured the data siphon and initiated immediate evasion, driving away from the epicenter as the landscape violently snapped back to its barren midday state. The critical finding: the monolith, the temporal anchor, was not merely storing the loop. It was acting as a consciousness battery. The awe and terror of the static figures, the guardians, their sustained psychological state of being trapped in beauty, was the exact energy input required to fuel the massive temporal expenditure. The loop was indeed a cage, sustained by the passive observation of its victims. This proves the reality gate's infrastructure utilizes not just material and time, but raw, distilled human emotion as a stable fuel source. This is a profound escalation of a threat. The entity controlling this infrastructure understands human vulnerability. My successful data siphon confirmed the temporal signature of the gate, but I failed to save the guardians. They remained behind, their temporal coherence too shattered to be recovered. They dissolved into dust as the loop broke. The psychological toll is severe. I experienced a moment of total detachment, struggling to distinguish my observations from the phantom memories injected by the anchor. The key weakness is their reliance on sustained emotional stasis. My rapid, chaotic movement and psychic counterforce broke the pattern. My mission parameters must now include disrupting psychological anchors as a primary objective. I have the temporal signature and the gate's psychological blueprint. I need to find the next point of resource collection. Final log notation: the loop is a cage.
Log analysis complete for the Perpetual Sunset. The temporal data extracted from the remote salt flats confirms a severe reality breach and the manifestation of a consciousness battery. This infrastructure, sustained by the temporal loop, actively consumes distilled human emotion, awe and fear, as a stable fuel source for the reality gate. Kane successfully destroyed the temporal anchor, proving the loop's key weakness is emotional stasis. However, the cost was the final temporal disintegration of the trapped observers. The gate's infrastructure utilizes psychological warfare. Desmond Kane's observations are critical for identifying the reality gate's psychological blueprint. We continue to monitor the archive. New data is constantly being uploaded, each entry a step closer to understanding and potentially containing these dimensional anomalies. Your continued access and support are vital. To stay informed on the unfolding dimensional crisis, and to witness Kane's next discovery, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. Your participation is critical. Protocol terminated. System standby.